The principles of animation. There has been a lot of talking around this subject, so I'm guessing most of you already know what I'm talking about. There are a lot of YouTube tutorials that explain what the principles are, but none of them actually explain how to apply the principle inside After Effects. That's why I thought starting off by showing you some tips on this would be a perfect way. I strongly believe that every motion designer should always keep these principles in consideration while animating. Even I have seen a huge improvement in the quality of my work when I implemented them in my workflow. Before jumping into After Effects, let's have a quick overview in case some of you don't know what these principles are. The principles of animation were first introduced by two Disney animators, Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas, in their book called The Illusion of Life, which was released in 1981. In this book, they examined the work of Disney animators from the 1930s and summed up their approach into 12 basic principles. Many refer to this book as the Bible of animation, and these principles are relevant not only for bringing character to life, but for basically every type of animation you can think of, from motion design to brand logos and user interfaces. To help you understand these principles, let's see some examples. The first one is squash and stretch. Squash and stretch gives the illusion of weight and volume as something moves. This is done by slightly expanding and compressing the shape of your subject. This principle is one of the most important because it really gives a clearer sense of weight and gravity as an element moves, which is essential in giving the illusion of movement. Squash and stretch can be implemented to many different subjects of your animation, like a character's eye when they blink, or when someone is surprised or scared. Their face squashes down and stretches. This is a great principle to use and exaggerate in animation, adding more appeal and a sense of reality to a movement. The second principle of animation is anticipation. Anticipation is used to let the audience know that a major action is about to take place. For this effect, animators will often work in a smaller act right before the main action happens to signal that something is coming. Not only is anticipation needed to prepare the audience, but it's also required to sell believable movements. As you can see in the video I'm showing you, the character always anticipates what he's about to do. For example, when he's playing tennis, you can clearly see how he holds back his racket for a few frames before he hits the ball. This way, he's not only anticipating what he's about to do, but he is also charging the scene with a lot of energy. The same anticipation can be seen right after when the character turns into a boxer and he pulls his hand behind before punching the screen. Imagine if these actions had no anticipation. They wouldn't be believable and they would not convey properly the actions we are seeing on screen. Follow-through and overlapping actions can be considered as two different principles, but they are still related. The follow-through principle argues that when a subject is in motion and stops, it doesn't stop all at once. It's basically the opposite of anticipation. Anticipation happens before the main action, while follow-through happens after the action. Tied to this idea is the overlapping action principle. It describes the offset between the timing of different elements of the animation. Overlapping can happen between connected elements. Imagine the head of a character following the movement of the body with a lag of a few frames. But it can also happen between different parts of the same element. Imagine a blade of grass blowing in the wind where the base moves first and the rest follows behind, giving you that wavy motion. So to sum it up, follow-through is a subtle bouncing at the end of an action, while overlapping is a delay between different elements. In real life, everything moves at different speeds and in different moments in time. That's why follow-through and overlapping actions are so important for capturing realistic and fluid movements. The fourth principle refers to arcs. Everything in real life moves in the shape of some sort of arc. So in animation it's important to stick to the same principle, ensuring your animation is smooth and it moves in a realistic way. For example, if a character is turning his head, he will dip his head down during the turn, creating an arc as it moves. But this principle doesn't apply only in characters, as you also want to ensure other subtle things move in arcs as well. The next principle consists in slowing in and slowing out actions. As any object or person moves, there needs to be a time for acceleration and deceleration. Without easy in and easy out actions, movements become very unnatural and robotic. In traditional animation, when a subject is performing an action, you will have more frames at the start of the action, then less frames in the middle, and more again at the end of the action. This creates a slowing in and slowing out effect in the action that copies lifelike movements. The same principle applies for digital animation, where the movement of an action is defined through speed and value graphs. The sixth principle is timing, which is a bit technical. Timing refers to the number of frames for any given action, which basically translates to the speed of the action itself. Animators can have scenes look slower and smoother using more frames, or faster and crispier with less frames. For example, when a circle travels from the left to the right of your screen, its timing will be the number of frames you choose to have for this movement. Spacing refers to how your subject is placed in those individual frames. If the circle is placed close together, it means this object is moving slower. If the circle is placed farther apart, then it's moving faster. The next principle is secondary actions. A secondary action refers to any other action or movement that supports the main action of an animation. This can give a sense of real-life actions in any animation by simply creating a more convincing performance. For instance, anytime you walk, you don't just move your legs, torso, and feet. Your whole body is balancing, so small traits like your head, your hair, or even your clothes move at the same time. By adding these secondary actions to a main character, you're creating a believable animation because it imitates what happens in real life. The next principle is exaggeration. Animation is all about exaggerating movements. Exaggeration can be used to create extremely cartoony movements or refused with a little more restraint to create more realistic actions. Whether you choose to use it as a stylized option or in a real-life-like scene, exaggeration should always be implemented to some degree. Even if your goal is to achieve a realistic animation, you can use exaggeration to make your movement more readable, so as to help your audience understand what's happening in the scene. The ninth principle is staging. Staging is the principle that directs the audience attention towards the most important elements in the scene. When you're setting up a scene, from the placement of the characters to the background and foreground elements to the camera angle, you're setting up the stage for your animation. The purpose of this is to make the animation clearer to the viewer. In the 10th principle, we are going to talk about straight ahead action and pose to pose. These are two different techniques used in traditional animation. Straight ahead action consists in creating the frames of any movement in a row, meaning drawing each frame one right after the other. With pose to pose, you plan the movement by drawing first the beginning and the end of an action. Only after this you can start to fill the frames in between and decide the speed of your action. Creating straight ahead actions is better for fluid and realistic movements, while pose to pose is more effective for dramatic or emotional scenes where you want to convey an idea rather than a sense of realness. The 11th principle is solid drawing. Solid drawing is all about making sure that animated forms feel like they move in a three-dimensional space, even though we see them as two-dimensional animations. And last but not least, we have appeal. An animator should strive to create something interesting and compelling to its audience. Basically, this principle comes down to adding more appeal in different areas of your animation, such as posing. However, the most obvious example in appeal is your character design, as you want to have an animation that the audience can connect and relate to.